The Swiss Alps are often celebrated for their towering mountains, crystal clear streams, and breathtaking landscapes. Yet the true wonder of this region lies not only in what we can see, but in the countless connections that bind every living thing together. Across these valleys, forests, meadows, and waterways, life moves through an intricate web of relationships. Sunlight falls upon leaves, plants transform that energy into growth, insects flowers, birds carry seeds, animals graze across the grasslands. Beneath the soil, unseen organisms recycle nutrients and prepare the ground for new life to emerge. Each species plays a role. Every habitat contributes something essential. Water flowing from distant mountain snowfields nourishes forests, gardens, ponds, and streams. Flowers feed pollinators. Pollinators help create fruits and seeds. Predators regulate populations. Decomposers return nutrients to the earth. Together, they form a living system that has evolved over thousands of years. At first glance, these connections may seem invisible. A butterfly drifting across a meadow, a fish swimming beneath the surface of a stream, or a bird calling from the edge of a forest can appear to be acting alone. But each as part of a much larger story, a story of energy, cooperation, adaptation, and survival. In this documentary, we will follow the pathways that connect life throughout the Swiss Alps. From the first rays of sunlight reaching the mountain peaks to the smallest organisms hidden beneath the soil, we will explore how every part of the ecosystem depends upon another. This is a journey through forests and meadows, streams and ponds, flowers and wildlife. More importantly, it is a journey into the relationships that sustain an entire world. Welcome to the Swiss Alps. Welcome to the web of life. The first light of life, before the songs of birds fill the morning air, before insects begin their daily journeys, and before animals emerge from their resting places. The day begins with something far more fundamental: light. Every living system in the Alps depends upon a continuous flow of energy from the sun. Without it, forests would not grow. Meadows would not bloom, and the countless creatures that inhabit these landscapes would have no source of food or shelter. As dawn approaches, the highest peaks receive the first rays of sunlight. The mountains appear silent and still, yet they are already participating in a process that supports life throughout the valley below. Snow and ice, stored at high elevations, gradually release water into streams and rivers. That water will eventually nourish forests, wetlands, gardens, and grasslands many kilometers away. The arrival of morning light marks the beginning of another cycle. Across the Alpine landscape, temperatures slowly rise. Moisture collected during the night begins to evaporate. Tiny droplets of dew shimmer briefly before returning to the atmosphere. These daily changes may seem small, but together they help regulate the movement of water through the ecosystem. Where sunlight reaches the surface of the land, plants begin their work. Unlike animals, plants do not search for food. Instead, they create it. Using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide from the air, they produce the energy-rich compounds that form the foundation of nearly every food chain in the Alps. This remarkable process, known as photosynthesis, quietly powers the entire ecosystem. The grasses covering the meadows, the wildflowers scattered across the hillsides, the shrubs along the forest edge, and the trees rising above the valley all share the same role. They capture energy from the sun and transform it into living tissue. Every leaf becomes a small solar collector. Glück. Every stem becomes a pathway for water and nutrients. Every root becomes a connection between the plant and the soil beneath it. Although these processes are invisible to the human eye, they are occurring everywhere at the same moment. As sunlight spreads across the meadows, thousands of species begin responding to the changing conditions. Flowers open their petals to the warming air. Glück. New shoots continue their growth toward the light. Seeds hidden within the soil receive signals that the growing season is underway. The landscape appears calm, yet it is filled with activity. Glück. Beneath the surface, roots expand through the soil in search of moisture and minerals. Water moves upward through stems and trunks. Nutrients circulate through living tissues. Glück. Energy captured from sunlight begins its journey through the web of life. Soon that energy will support pollinators gathering nectar from flowers. It will support grazing animals feeding in meadows. It will support fish living in cold mountain streams. It will support birds, mammals, insects, and countless organisms that depend directly or indirectly upon plants. The first light of day is therefore much more than a beautiful moment. Look, it is the beginning of a chain of connections that reaches every corner of the ecosystem. A single ray of sunlight striking a leaf may eventually become part of a flower, a seed. Glück. An insect, a bird, or a forest animal. Energy is constantly moving, changing form and linking one living thing to another. This is one of nature's most extraordinary achievements. From a distance, the Swiss Alps may seem defined by mountains and scenery, but beneath that beauty lies a complex network powered by the simple interaction of sunlight, water, air and life itself. As the valley fully awakens, the foundations of that network are already in place. The sun continues its climb above the mountains. Streams carry fresh water through the landscape. Glück plants gather energy from the morning light, and the great web of life begins another day. To the silent producers, as the morning sun rises higher above the Alps, the energy that entered the ecosystem through light begins to take shape in living forms. The green world awakens. Across the valley, meadows ripple in the breeze, shrubs spread along forest edges, young shoots emerge from fertile soil, and trees stretch their leaves towards the sky together. These plants perform one of the most important roles in nature. They are the producers, the living foundation upon which every other form of life depends. Unlike animals, plants do not consume other organisms to survive. Instead, they create their own food using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Through photosynthesis, they transform energy from the sun into leaves, stems, roots, flowers, fruits, and seeds. In doing so, they provide the energy that will eventually support the entire ecosystem. The grasses of the Alpine meadows are among the most important producers in the valley. Glück. Their leaves continuously capture sunlight throughout the growing season. What may appear to be a simple field of grass is actually a vast energy-producing system supporting insects. Glück. Grazing animals, soil organisms, and countless other species. Mixed among the grasses are hundreds of flowering plants. Each species occupies its own place within the landscape. pollinators are present. Others flower later, extending the season of growth and providing resources across many months. Together they create a changing mosaic of colors. Look, shapes and scents that attracts a remarkable diversity of wildlife. Beyond the open meadows, shrubs form another layer of life. These woody plants provide shelter from wind, nesting sites for birds. Look, and protective cover for small mammals. Their flowers offer nectar and pollen, while their fruits later become valuable food for animals moving through the valley. Shrubs also help stabilize the soil. Their roots bind the ground together, reducing erosion and helping water infiltrate deeper into the earth. In this way, they contribute not only to biodiversity but also to the long-term health of the landscape itself. Further still, orchards and woodland edges reveal another expression of plant life. Trees grow more slowly than grasses and wildflowers, yet they store far greater amounts of energy and biomass. Look, their branches provide habitats for birds, insects, and mammals. Their leaves capture sunlight high above the ground, while their roots reach deep into the soil in search of water and nutrients. Look, a mature tree represents years of accumulated sunlight transformed into living wood. Throughout the seasons, trees also produce blossoms, fruits, and seeds, creating opportunities for many other species to thrive. What begins as sunlight captured by leaves eventually becomes nourishment for insects, birds, mammals, and even future generations of plants in gardens throughout the valley. Cultivated plants continue the same process. Vegetables, herbs, and fruit-bearing crops are not separate from the natural ecosystem. They participate in the same biological cycles as every wild plant around them. Their roots interact with the soil, their flowers attract pollinators, their growth depends upon sunlight and water just as much as any wildflower growing on a mountain slope. Whether wild or cultivated, large or small, every plant shares a common purpose. They convert energy into life. Without them, there would be no nectar for bees, no seeds for birds. No leaves for grazing animals, and no fruits for countless species throughout the ecosystem. Yet plants offer more than food alone. They create habitats, regulate temperatures. Look, enrich soils, slow the movement of water, release oxygen into the atmosphere, and influence the conditions under which other organisms live. They shape the environment while simultaneously sustaining it. For this reason, the producers of the Alps are far more than background scenery. They are the architects of life. Every meadow, every shrub, every tree, and every garden contributes to a living network that stretches across the entire valley. Through their quiet and constant work, they capture the energy of the sun and transform it into opportunities for countless other species. The web of life begins here, in the leaves reaching toward the light. Look, in the roots hidden beneath the soil, and in the silent producers that make all other life possible. Part 3, the pollinators. The energy captured by plants does not remain locked within leaves and stems. As flowers begin to bloom across the Swiss Alps, a new chapter in the web of life unfolds. Look, the season of pollination has arrived. For flowering plant reproduction depends on the movement of pollen. This fine powder contains the genetic material needed to create seeds and future generations of bumblebees. Butterflies, hoverflies, beetles, and many other insects spend their lives moving from flower to flower in search of nectar and pollen. What appears to be a simple search for food is actually one of the most important ecological relationships on Earth. As a pollinator visits a flower, grains of pollen cling to its body. When it flies to another flower of the same species, some of that pollen is transferred. The plant receives the opportunity to produce seeds and fruit, while the insect receives nourishment. Both benefit. Across the Alpine meadows, this exchange takes place thousands of times each day. Wildflowers open their petals to attract visitors. Some produce bright colors that stand out against the surrounding vegetation. Others release fragrances that guide insects from a distance. Many have evolved specific shapes that encourage pollinators to brush against pollen-bearing structures as they feed. The relationship is the result of millions of years of evolution. Flowers and pollinators have influenced one another for countless generations, gradually forming partnerships that help both survive. Some insects can access deep flowers using long tongues. Others specialize in collecting pollen from certain groups of plants. Together, they create a network of interactions that link species throughout the valley. Among the most important pollinators are the bees. Their bodies are uniquely adapted for gathering pollen, and many species spend nearly every daylight hour visiting flowers. A single bee may travel between hundreds of blossoms in one day, connecting plants that would otherwise remain isolated from one another. Bumblebees play a particularly important role in the cooler environments of the Alps. Their dense bodies help them remain active in temperatures that would limit many other insects. Even during cool mornings, they can often be seen moving steadily among flowers while the landscape is still warming beneath the sun. Butterflies contribute in a different way. Their movements are often slower and more visible, carrying pollen across meadows and along forest edges. While feeding on nectar, they connect distant patches of flowering plants, helping maintain genetic diversity throughout the ecosystem. Hoverflies, frequently mistaken for bees, are also valuable pollinators. Although less well known, they visit a wide range of flowers and provide essential services to many plant species. Together, these insects form a living transportation system for pollen. Without them, many flowers would fail to produce seeds. Fruit production would decline. Future generations of plants would become less abundant. The effects would spread throughout the food web, influencing birds, mammals, and countless other organisms that depend on flowering plants. Pollination is therefore much more than an interaction between insects and flowers. It is a process that shapes entire ecosystems. The apples grown in orchards, the berries ripening along forest edges, the seeds carried by the wind, and the wildflowers that return each spring all depend, in some way, upon successful pollination. Every visit to a flower helps sustain the future. Every flight contributes to the continuation of life. As pollinators move through the valley, they connect habitats that may appear separate to human observers. Meadows, gardens, orchards, woodland edges, and mountain slopes become part of a single ecological network linked by countless journeys between blossoms. The work of pollinators is often overlooked because it happens quietly and on a small scale, yet their influence reaches across entire landscapes through their daily movements. Flowers become seeds, seeds become future plants, and the web of life grows stronger with every passing season. In the Swiss Alps, the story of spring cannot be told through flowers alone. It must also be told through the wings that carry their future from one bloom to the next. Part 4, the herbivores of the valley. The flowering plants of the Alps have captured sunlight, transformed it into living tissue, and spread their future through seeds and pollen. Glück. Now that stored energy begins another stage of its journey through the web of life. Across the valley, countless animals depend directly on plants for survival. These are the herbivores, the grazers. Browsers and plant eaters that convert vegetation into movement, growth, and life. From the smallest leaf-eating insects to large mammals roaming the meadows and forest edges. Herbivores occupy a vital position within the ecosystem. They form the bridge between the producers and the many predators that depend upon them. Every blade of grass, every leaf, flower, and every seed represents energy captured from the sun. Herbivores unlock that energy and carry it through the food web. Among the smallest herbivores are insects. Caterpillars consume leaves as they grow, transforming plant material into the energy needed for their remarkable metamorphosis. Grasshoppers feed on meadow vegetation. While numerous beetles and other insects specialize in consuming specific plant species, although individually small, their combined impact is enormous. In fact, a significant portion of the energy produced by plants each year enters the food web through insects. These tiny herbivores become food for birds, amphibians, reptiles, spiders, and countless other animals. In many ways, they are the foundation upon which larger food chains are built. Beyond the world of insects, larger herbivores shape the landscape in visible ways. Along forest edges and open meadows, deer browse on young shoots, leaves, and tender vegetation. Their feeding influences which plants become dominant and which remain rare by selecting certain species while avoiding others. They help shape the composition of plant communities over time. This relationship is not one-sided. Plants have evolved a wide range of defenses against herbivores. Some produce bitter chemicals. Others grow protective thorns or develop tougher leaves that are more difficult to consume. Herbivores, in turn, have evolved strategies to overcome these challenges. The result is an ongoing evolutionary dialogue between plants and the animals that feed upon them. Across alpine grasslands, grazing animals play an especially important role. Their feeding prevents a small number of plant species from dominating the landscape. By regularly consuming vegetation, they create opportunities for many different plants to coexist. This helps maintain the extraordinary biodiversity that characterizes healthy mountain meadows. In areas influenced by traditional farming, livestock become part of this ecological process. Cattle, sheep, and goats transform grasses and herbs into animal life while simultaneously influencing the structure of the vegetation around them. Their grazing patterns create a mosaic of habitats that can support a wide variety of insects. Birds and small mammals. The relationship between grazing animals and plants extends beyond as herbivores move across the landscape. They transport seeds attached to their fur or carried within their digestive systems. In doing so, they help plants colonize new areas and maintain genetic connections between populations. Even their waste contributes to the cycle of life. nutrients consumed from plants eventually return to the soil, where they become available once again for future growth. This recycling process strengthens the connection between animals, plants, and the living communities beneath the ground. Glück. Yet herbivores are not merely ecosystem engineers. Their movements create pathways through vegetation, their feeding shapes habitats, their presence influences the distribution of predators and scavengers. Through countless interactions, they help determine how energy and nutrients move through the environment. Without herbivores, the web of life would look very different. Predators would lose an important food source. Plant communities would change dramatically. Nutrient cycles would slow. Many ecological relationships that have evolved over thousands of years would begin to unravel. The herbivores of the valley therefore represent far more than animals feeding on plants. They are the living connection between sunlight captured by leaves and the larger ecosystem that depends upon that energy. Every bite of grass, every leaf consumed, every seed carried across a meadow. These simple acts help sustain a network of life that stretches from the soil beneath our feet to the highest peaks of the Alps. In the great web of life, herbivores are not merely participants. They are essential links in the chain of the small hunters. The energy that began with sunlight and passed through plants and herbivores now continues its journey to another group of remarkable creatures. The hunters. Across the Swiss Alps, predators exist in almost every habitat. Some fly through the air, some wait silently among leaves, others hide beneath stones in the grass. Or along the edges of streams. Many are so small that they are rarely noticed, yet their influence reaches throughout the ecosystem. These hunters help maintain balance. Without them, populations of herbivorous insects and other small animals could grow rapidly, placing immense pressure on plants and disrupting the delicate relationships that sustain life across the valley. Among the most familiar of these predators are ladybirds. Their bright colors may appear gentle and harmless, but they are highly effective hunters. Both adults and larvae feed on aphids, tiny insects that consume plant sap. A single ladybird can eat hundreds of aphids during its lifetime, helping protect wild plants, shrubs, orchard trees, and garden crops. Their role demonstrates an important principle of ecology. Predators do not simply remove prey. They help prevent any one species from becoming too abundant. In doing so, they contribute to the stability and diversity of entire ecosystems. Spiders perform a similar function. Across meadows and forest edges, countless spiders hunt insects using a wide variety of strategies. Some build intricate webs designed to intercept flying prey. Others rely on speed, camouflage, or patience. A web glistening with morning dew is more than a beautiful sight. It is part of a sophisticated hunting system developed through millions of years of evolution. Elsewhere, ambush predators wait motionless among flowers and leaves. Perfectly adapted to their surroundings, they blend into the environment until an unsuspecting insect comes within reach. In a matter of seconds, a hunt may be over before it is even noticed. These interactions may seem harsh from a human perspective, but they are essential components of a healthy ecosystem. Predation is not a sign of imbalance. It is one of the processes that creates balance. By limiting the numbers of certain species, predators allow many others to coexist. They prevent resources from being exhausted and help maintain the diversity that characterizes thriving natural communities. Some hunters take to the air. Dragonflies patrol ponds, wetlands and streams with extraordinary precision. Their large eyes provide nearly panoramic vision, allowing them to detect movement in multiple directions at once. Agile and fast. Look, they capture flying insects in mid-air, making them among the most successful predators in the insect world. Their presence connects aquatic and terrestrial habitats. Dragonfly larvae develop beneath the water, where they hunt other aquatic organisms after emerging as adults. They continue their role as predators in the air. In this way, they link different parts of the ecosystem through a single life cycle. Predatory beetles, assassin bugs, mantises, and numerous other invertebrates contribute to this hidden network of hunters. Each species occupies its own ecological niche, targeting different prey and helping regulate populations in unique ways. Together, they form a complex community of predators operating across the landscape. The influence of these hunters extends far beyond the prey they consume. Their presence affects behavior. Prey species often alter where they feed, how long they remain exposed, and when they become active. As a result, predators shape ecosystems not only through direct hunting, but also through the choices their prey make in order to survive. This constant interaction creates a dynamic balance between predator and prey. Neither side remains dominant for long. Instead, both participate in an ongoing relationship that has evolved over countless generations. In the meadows, forests, gardens, and waterways of the Alps, these small hunters work continuously, often unseen. They help protect plant communities, they support biodiversity. They strengthen the resilience of the ecosystem. Most importantly, they ensure that energy continues flowing through the web of life in a balanced and sustainable way, though small in size. Their ecological importance is immense. Every successful hunt, every captured insect, every predator waiting patiently among the flowers, together they help maintain the harmony of a living world where every species, whether hunter or hunted, has a role to play. The world beneath the water. From the meadows and forests of the Swiss Alps, the web of life now follows another path, a path shaped by water. Streams descending from the mountains. Quiet ponds nestled among grasslands and small wetlands scattered across the valley all support communities that remain largely hidden from view. Although these habitats occupy only a small portion of the landscape. They are among the most productive and biologically important environments in the entire ecosystem. At first glance, the surface of a pond or stream may appear calm and empty. Yet beneath the water exists a world filled with movement, competition, growth, and cooperation. Life in aquatic environments begins much as it does around the producers microscopic algae. Look. Aquatic plants and other photosynthetic organisms capture sunlight and transform it into energy. These producers form the foundation of underwater food webs, supplying nourishment for countless organisms that inhabit the water. Even the smallest pond contains an astonishing diversity of life. Tiny invertebrates drift through the water column. Aquatic insects move among submerged vegetation. Snails graze on algae growing across rocks and stems. Countless microscopic organisms recycle nutrients and contribute to the health of the ecosystem. Many of these creatures are rarely seen, yet they perform essential ecological functions. They break down organic matter, they recycle nutrients, they transfer energy from producers to larger animals. Without them, aquatic ecosystems could not function. Among the most fascinating residents of freshwater habitats are amphibians. Frogs, toads, and newts depend upon water during critical stages of their lives. Their life cycles illustrate one of nature's most remarkable transformations. A frog begins life as an egg suspended in water. From that egg emerges a tadpole adapted entirely for an aquatic existence. It breathes through gills, swims with a tail, and feeds within the underwater world as development continues. Legs appear, the tail gradually shrinks. Lungs replace gills. Eventually, the young amphibian leaves the water and enters a completely different environment. This transformation connects two ecosystems at once. Amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land, carrying energy and nutrients between habitats that might otherwise remain separate. Fish represent another important component of freshwater ecosystems. Cold, oxygen-rich alpine waters provide ideal conditions for many species within streams and ponds. Fish occupy different ecological roles. Some feed on aquatic insects, others consume algae or organic matter. Larger individuals may prey upon smaller aquatic animals. Their presence influences the entire food web. Fish regulate populations of aquatic organisms while also serving as prey for birds, mammals, and other predators. Through these interactions, they help connect freshwater environments with the wider landscape. Water itself serves as a powerful ecological link. A mountain stream may begin as melting snow high above the valley. Along its journey, it transports nutrients, sediments, organic material, and living organisms. It nourishes wetlands. Supports vegetation and provides drinking water for wildlife throughout the region. What happens in one part of the watershed can influence habitats many kilometers away. A leaf falling into a stream becomes food for aquatic organisms. An insect emerging from the water becomes food for birds. Nutrients carried downstream support life far beyond their original source. In this way, water creates connections that extend across the entire ecosystem. The boundaries between aquatic and terrestrial life are far less distinct than they appear. Dragonflies begin life underwater before taking to the air. Birds hunt insects emerging from streams. Mammals visit ponds to drink. Plants along the shoreline stabilize soil and provide shelter for aquatic species. Every habitat influences another. Every species contributes to a larger network of relationships. The world beneath the water may often remain hidden, but it is far from isolated. It is a vital part of the web of life. Here, energy captured by aquatic plants moves through food chains. Nutrients are recycled and transported. Species adapt to changing conditions and interact in countless ways. Beneath the reflective surface of every pond and stream lies a living community that helps sustain the entire valley. A community shaped by water. A community connected to every other part of the Alps. And a community that reminds us that even the worlds we rarely see are essential to the life that surrounds us. 7 wings across the valley. As sunlight moves across the mountains and rivers continue their journey through the landscape, another group of animals connects the many habitats of the Alps in a unique way. The birds. Unlike most creatures of the valley, birds are not limited by rivers, forests, meadows, or mountain slopes with the power of flight. They move freely between habitats, linking distant parts of the ecosystem through their daily activities. In many ways, birds are among nature's greatest connectors. A single bird may begin its morning in a field, search for food in an open meadow, drink from the stream, rest beside the pond, and return to the trees before nightfall. Through these movements, birds carry energy, nutrients, seeds, and ecological interactions across the landscape. Their presence can be seen in nearly every corner of the Alps. Some species search for insects among wildflowers. Others forage for seeds hidden within grasses. Many depend on berries, fruits, or aquatic organisms. Each species occupies its own ecological role, yet together they form an important bridge between habitats. The relationship between birds and insects is particularly significant. Throughout spring and summer, countless birds feed on insects to support their own survival and growth of their young. A nesting bird may make hundreds of feeding trips each day, gathering caterpillars, beetles, flies, and other small prey. This continuous hunting helps regulate insect populations and contributes to ecological balance at the same time. Insects provide an essential source of energy for birds during one of the most demanding periods of their lives. The connection works both ways. Birds depend upon healthy insect populations, while ecosystems benefit from the natural control birds provide. Many birds also play an important role in seed dispersal. As they feed on fruits and berries, seeds pass through their digestive systems and are deposited in new locations. Some seeds become attached to feathers or feet and are carried across considerable distances. Through these movements, birds help plants expand into new habitats and maintain genetic diversity throughout the landscape. A tree growing along a forest edge, a shrub beside a stream, or a berry-producing plant in a distant meadow may owe its existence to a seed transported by a bird. The influence of birds extends far beyond what we immediately observe. Some species act as pollinators. Others contribute to nutrient cycling. Many serve as prey for larger predators, while simultaneously functioning as predators themselves. Their activities create links between multiple levels of the food web. Waterbirds provide another example of these connections. Ponds, wetlands, and streams attract species that feed on aquatic insects, fish, amphibians, and plant material as they move between water and land. They transport nutrients and energy across ecosystem boundaries. A bird feeding at a pond in the morning may later rest in a meadow or forest, carrying ecological influences from one habitat to another. Because birds are highly mobile, they often respond quickly to changes in the environment. Their abundance, diversity, and behavior can reveal the health of an ecosystem. Yeah, a landscape rich in birds usually reflects a landscape rich in habitats, food sources, and ecological opportunities. For this reason, birds are often considered indicators of biodiversity. When bird populations thrive, many other forms of life are thriving as well. Above all, birds remind us that ecosystems are not collections of isolated places. A forest depends upon what happens in nearby meadows. A meadow depends upon pollinators, streams. A pond depends upon vegetation along its shores. And birds move among all of them, weaving connections that strengthen the entire network. Every flight across the valley carries more than a bird from one place to another. It carries seeds to future habitats, it transfers energy through food webs, It links landscapes that might otherwise remain disconnected, from the smallest songbird to the largest soaring hunter. Each species contributes to the living network that sustains life throughout the Alps. Their wings cross valleys, rivers, forests, and mountains, and with every journey, they help bind the web of life. Part 8, the forest edge, where worlds meet. Throughout the Alps, forests and meadows often appear to be separate worlds. One is shaded, sheltered, and dominated by trees. The other is open. Sunlit and covered with grasses and wildflowers, yet some of the richest biodiversity in the entire landscape is found not deep within the forest or far out in the meadow, but in the narrow zone where these two habitats meet. This transition zone, sometimes called an ecological boundary, is a place of extraordinary opportunity. Here, species from different environments come together. Resources overlap, conditions vary over short distances. As a result, life flourishes. A few steps can carry an animal from sunlight into shade, from open grassland into dense vegetation, from flowering meadows into protected woodland cover. For many species, this diversity is invaluable. Plants growing at the forest edge benefit from a unique combination of light and shelter. Some receive enough sunlight to flower successfully while remaining protected from strong winds and extreme weather. Shrubs often thrive in these conditions, producing blossoms, berries, and seeds that support a wide range of wildlife. These shrubs become important sources of food throughout the year. Their flowers attract pollinators. Their berries nourish birds and mammals. Their branches provide nesting sites and protection. What may appear to be a simple line of vegetation is actually a complex habitat supporting countless interactions. Small mammals are among the frequent visitors to the forest edge. The open meadow provides feeding opportunities, while nearby vegetation offers quick access to safety. Animals can move between resources and shelter within moments, reducing their exposure to predators while maximizing access to food. Birds are equally drawn to these transitional environments. Many species nest within trees or shrubs, but search for insects and seeds in the surrounding grasslands. The forest edge allows them to take advantage of multiple habitats without traveling long distances. This pattern is repeated throughout nature. Species often thrive where different environments overlap because they gain access to a wider variety of resources. The forest edge also plays an important role for larger herbivores. Deer and other grazing animals frequently move between woodland cover and open feeding areas. Forests provide protection during periods of rest, while nearby meadows offer abundant vegetation. Their movements create additional ecological connections between habitats. As animals travel, they disperse seeds, transport nutrients, and influence vegetation patterns across the landscape. Predators, too, are attracted to these zones. Where prey species gather, hunters often follow. The forest edge becomes a place of observation, movement, and opportunity where countless ecological relationships unfold every day. Yet the importance of the forest edge extends beyond individual species. It increases biodiversity itself, because organisms from both forests and meadows can occupy the same area. The number of species found within these transition zones is often higher than in either habitat alone. This phenomenon, known as the edge effect, is one of the reasons ecological boundaries are so important in natural systems. The forest edge demonstrates a fundamental principle of ecology. Life is strengthened through connection. The meadow does not exist independently from the forest. The forest does not exist independently from the meadow. Glück. Water, nutrients, seeds, insects, birds and animals move continuously between them. Energy flows across invisible boundaries. Relationships extend beyond habitat borders. The web of life becomes stronger because these worlds interact. As we look across the Alps, it becomes clear that nature rarely operates in isolation. The most important stories often unfold where different environments meet and influence one another. Look at the forest edge, sunlight and shade coexist. Open spaces and shelter exist side by side. Species from multiple habitats share the same landscape and within this meeting place. Countless connections help sustain the wider ecosystem. It is here that the boundaries between worlds begin to disappear. And it is here that the true interconnected nature of life becomes impossible to ignore. Part 9, the recyclers of life. Every leaf that grows will eventually fall. Every flower will fade. Every animal, no matter how large or small, will one day reach the end of its life. Glück. In nature, however, endings are never truly endings. They are transformations. As we follow the web of life through the Swiss Alps, we arrive at one of the most important yet often overlooked parts of the ecosystem. Glück, the recyclers. These organisms ensure that nothing is wasted and that the materials of life continue their journey through the natural world. Without them, forests would become buried beneath layers of dead leaves. Meadows would fill with decaying plant matter. Nutrients would remain locked away and unavailable to future generations of living organisms. The cycle of life would gradually slow to a halt. Fortunately, nature has evolved an extraordinary community of recyclers that quietly keep the ecosystem functioning. The process begins the moment organic material returns to the environment. A fallen leaf lands on the forest floor. A flower wilts at the end of its season. A branch breaks during a storm. What appears to be waste is actually the beginning of a new ecological pathway. Countless organisms immediately begin to work on decomposition. Small invertebrates are often among the first to arrive. They shred leaves, break apart plant material, and increase the surface area available to other decomposers. Glück. Through their feeding activities, they begin converting larger pieces of organic matter into smaller fragments that can be processed more efficiently. Among the most important of these recyclers are earthworms. Moving through the soil, earthworms consume decaying organic material and mix it with mineral particles. Their activity improves soil structure, increases aeration, and helps distribute nutrients throughout the ground. Every tunnel they create allows water and oxygen to penetrate deeper into the soil. Every movement contributes to the health of the ecosystem above. Beneath the surface, an even larger community is at work. Glück. Fungi spread through soil and organic matter using networks of microscopic threads. Unlike plants, fungi do not produce their own food through sunlight instead. Glück. They obtain energy by breaking down dead material and absorbing the nutrients released during decomposition. Many fungi are capable of digesting substances that few other organisms can process. Glück. Wood, fallen branches and tough plant fibers gradually become part of the soil through their efforts. Alongside fungi, vast populations of bacteria carry out chemical processes essential for nutrient recycling. Although invisible to the naked eye, these microorganisms are among the most abundant and important forms of life in the ecosystem. They break complex organic compounds into simpler forms that plants can absorb and use once again. Together, fungi and bacteria form the foundation of decomposition. They complete the work begun by larger recyclers and return nutrients to the environment. The importance of this process cannot be overstated. The nitrogen in a leaf may one day become part of a wildflower. The minerals stored within a fallen tree may later support the growth of a young sapling. Look, the nutrients once contained within an animal may eventually nourish an entire community of plants. Nothing is truly lost. Materials simply move from one form of life to another. Glück. This continuous recycling creates one of the defining characteristics of healthy ecosystems: renewal. Each year, forests produce enormous amounts of organic material each year. Glück. Decomposers return those resources to the soil. The same nutrients are used again and again, supporting generation after generation of living organisms. In many ways, decomposers are the hidden workforce of the Alps. They receive little attention compared to birds, mammals, or flowering plants, yet every species depends upon their labor. Without decomposition, nutrients would remain trapped. Without nutrient recycling, plant growth would decline. Without plants, the entire food web would collapse. The recyclers therefore occupy a position as important as any predator. Pollinator, herbivore, or producer. They close the loop. They transform death into opportunity. They ensure that life continues. As fallen leaves disappear into the soil and nutrients begin another journey through the ecosystem. We are reminded that nature operates through cycles rather than endings. In the web of life, every conclusion becomes a beginning, and through the quiet work of the recyclers, look, the story of the Alps continues season after season, generation after generation. Humans in the web of life. Throughout this journey across the Swiss Alps, we have followed the flow of energy through an interconnected world. We have seen sunlight transformed into living plants. We have followed pollinators moving between flowers, herbivores feeding across meadows, predators maintaining balance, birds connecting distant habitats, aquatic life thriving beneath water, decomposers returning nutrients to the soil. At every stage, one truth has become increasingly clear. No species exists alone, and that includes us. Humans are often viewed as separate from nature. as though our farms, villages, and daily lives stand apart from the ecosystems that surround us. Yet the reality is very different. Like every other species in the Alps, we are participants in the same living network. The food we eat begins with sunlight captured by plants. The water we drink follows pathways shaped by mountains, forests, soils, and streams. The air we breathe is influenced by countless biological processes occurring throughout the landscape. Even the most carefully managed farm remains connected to the natural systems around it. In the valleys of the Alps, this relationship can be seen everywhere. Gardens depend on fertile soil created by generations of decomposers. Fruit trees rely on pollinators to produce harvests. Livestock graze on vegetation powered by sunlight and nourished by rainfall. Streams provide water that supports crops, wildlife, Glück, and human communities alike. What appears to be agricultural production is in many ways a partnership with nature. The success of farming depends upon healthy ecosystems. A thriving meadow supports pollinators. Pollinators support flowering plants and crops. Healthy soils support plant growth. Plants support animals. Animals contribute nutrients that eventually return to the land. The cycle continues. For centuries, people living in alpine regions have learned to work within these natural processes. Traditional farming practices often developed in response to the rhythms of the landscape rather than in opposition to them. Seasonal grazing, careful management of water resources, and the preservation of diverse habitats helped maintain a balance between human needs and ecological health. This balance is not always easy to achieve. Human activities can alter habitats, influence species populations, and affect the movement of water and nutrients. Decisions made in one part of the ecosystem may have consequences elsewhere. Because of this, understanding ecological connections becomes increasingly important. The web of life teaches a valuable lesson. Every action creates effects beyond what we immediately see. Protecting pollinators helps support future harvests. Maintaining healthy streams benefits both wildlife and people. Preserving forests stabilizes soils, regulates water, and creates habitat for countless species. Supporting biodiversity strengthens the resilience of the entire ecosystem. When one part of the web is weakened, other parts may also be affected. When connections are maintained, Glück, the whole system becomes stronger. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of nature is not the survival of individual species, but the relationships that unite them. The Alps are not sustained by a single organism. A single habitat or a single ecological process. They are sustained by cooperation, interaction, and balance. The meadow depends upon the forest. The forest depends upon the soil. The soil depends upon decomposers. Plants depend upon pollinators. Animals depend upon plants, and humans depend upon all of them. As our journey comes to an end, the landscape before us appears familiar. Yet perhaps it is seen differently now. The mountains remain, the streams continue to flow. Birds cross the sky, flowers open to the sun, life moves forward, just as it has for countless generations. But beneath this apparent simplicity lies a network of extraordinary complexity. A living system built from millions of connections, a web woven by energy, water, nutrients, movement. Every species, including us, the story of the Swiss Alps is not simply a story of mountains, forests, rivers, or wildlife. It is the story of relationships. A story in which every living thing contributes to something greater than itself. A story that continues every day, in every season, across every corner of the landscape. The story of the As the day draws to a close in the Swiss Alps, the web of life continues its endless work. The mountains will still gather snow, streams will continue their journey through forests. Glück. Meadows and valleys. Flowers will bloom and fade. Seeds will travel to new places. Birds will cross the sky. And beneath the soil, unseen communities will quietly prepare the ground for another season of growth. Glück. Life never stands still. Every moment, energy moves through the ecosystem, nutrients are recycled, relationships are formed and renewed. Countless species, each following its own path. Contribute to a living network far greater than themselves. Many of these connections are easy to overlook. A bee visiting a flower, a bird carrying a seed, a stream nourishing a meadow. A fallen leaf returning nutrients to the earth. Individually, they may seem small. Together, they sustain an entire world. The Swiss Alps remind us that nature is not built from isolated parts. It is built from relationships. Every organism, every habitat, and every ecological process is connected to another. The strength of the whole depends upon the health of those connections. Glück. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this landscape has to offer. Life thrives not through independence, but through interdependence. The forests, streams, ponds, meadows, mountains. Glück. Wildlife and people of the Alps are all threads within the same tapestry. And as long as those threads remain connected, the story of this remarkable ecosystem will continue. Thank you for joining this journey through the living network of the Swiss Alps. Until the next sunrise, the web of life goes on.